And I recommend drawing up your knees, so that your legs, so that your knees can rest one against the other. You might have to move up, make space for one or two more people coming in. Okay. Yes, please turn off your mobile phones. Close your eyes. And just try and let your body relax, especially your back. Just feel it sinking into the floor. Feeling your body become heavy. Just becoming aware of your breath for a few moments, feeling it coming into your body, leaving your body. And then bring your attention up onto your face. And if you notice that your brow is furrowed, just release it. If you feel any tension around the eyes, try to let them become soft. And similarly with the mouth. And if you notice that your jaw is clenched, just release it. And try to imagine a sense of relaxation spreading from your face across the crown of your head, the back of your head, down through your neck and throat, into your shoulders. And then continue on, taking your awareness down through your arms, through the elbows, into your wrists, into your hands, to the tips of your fingers. And then bring your attention up to your shoulders once more. And especially trying to let the shoulder blades sink into the floor. So the chest can open. And just trying to imagine your back relaxing further and further into the floor. All the way down your spine. Bring your attention onto the abdomen. And just checking that you're not holding your stomach. If you notice you're doing that, well, just let it go. And allowing a sense of relaxation to drift further down through your body, through the pelvic region, into your thighs, through your knees, down through your calf muscles, ankles, and feet, right to the tips of your toes. And now bring your attention back onto the breathing. Just following the breath for a few moments. And then when you're ready, opening your eyes. Then turning onto your left-hand side slowly, when you're ready. And then slowly sitting up for the meditation. Could a member of the team turn on the fans, please? Get some air circulating in the room. So welcome everyone from me. My name is David Mitra, and this evening we will be doing the Metta Bhavana practice. And then after that we'll have a tea break. And after tea break I will be giving another talk exploring different aspects of the so-called reactive mind and the creative mind. So that's after the tea break. In the meantime, if you'd like to set yourself up, make sure you've got everything you need, that you're sitting comfortably. If you need an extra cushion, we've got plenty. And if you can, trying to sit perfectly still throughout the meditation. If you're in serious discomfort, then of course do move. But otherwise, try to be as still as you possibly can. So in a few moments we'll be having a tea break, and after that, as I said, I'll give a short talk, maybe with some questions and answers, and we will of course finish as usual with a shorter period of meditation. So go and get some tea, get a biscuit or two, and see you after tea break. So welcome back. As I said at the beginning of the class, I'm going to speak for a while about a couple of aspects of the mind, that is the reactive mind and the creative mind. And I've been doing this for the last 2 weeks. So how I've been going about doing this is, well, first of all, just giving a very brief recap of what we mean by the reactive mind and the creative mind. First point to understand, which is quite fundamental, is that there are not two separate minds. There's just the one mind, but there are two different modes in which we can act, and they're opposed to each other in a way. The reactive mind, you could say, is the mind that we're most familiar with. It's a mind which tends to react. In other words, it goes over familiar patterns. It's a habitual mind. It's a conditioned mind. It's a mind which is not free from the conditioning which has created it. And we're all affected by different aspects of conditioning. That's a very big topic in Buddhist teaching. So you've got those kind of qualities. It's a habitual mind, a repetitive mind, a predictable mind, you could say. And very often it's characterized by unawareness. In fact, it's always characterized by unawareness, and frequently also by negative emotions as opposed to positive emotions. So very often we act out of this kind of mind, but we do have a choice. We don't have to act in habitual ways. We can develop positive emotion. We can develop greater awareness, and that introduces a certain amount of spontaneity and freedom into our lives. So I'm going to talk a little bit about one aspect of the reactive mind and one aspect of the creative mind. And I've been doing this over the last 2 weeks, this third week, by referring to a very fundamental Buddhist teaching, the teaching of what we call the three poisons. And the three poisons are greed, hatred, and delusion. And according to Buddhist analysis, these poisons are what it underlies the whole of what we refer to as conditioned existence. And so greed, hatred, and delusion. I've spoken about greed and hatred in the last 2 weeks, but I also spoke about something which is, broadly speaking, its positive counterparts, aspects of the creative mind. So in the first week it was greed and generosity. In the second week it was hatred and love in the sense of metta. And this evening I'm going to be talking about delusion and wisdom. So they're the two aspects of our minds that I'm going to be looking at. Now, these three poisons are the root emotions, you could say, which drive us. It's the emotions which make us act. That's what an emotion is. An emotion is something which moves you into action. You may be surprised, therefore, that delusion or ignorance would be included, because we may not even think in terms of delusion or ignorance as being an emotion. But from a Buddhist point of view, it is, and in this way. Delusion or ignorance, spiritual ignorance, blindness, is a sort of emotional resistance to seeing the reality of things. Let me give you a simple example. This year is a very special year for many people in this country and around the world. It's the World Cup. The World Cup finals will soon be upon us. It's repetitive. So what that means is that a lot of people will start building up their hopes. Come summertime, they'll be at fever pitch. It's our year. We're going to win it this year. Now, despite the evidence of history, the English football team does not have a habit of winning the World Cup. But nonetheless, people's hopes get built up. They start watching the football matches, and get a form of distraction. But anyway, we won't go into all that. And I warn them. I warn my friends, because I'm afraid several of my friends, people who actually teach here even, get caught up in all of this. And I say every time, look, it'll end in tears. And it nearly always does. Maybe there will be 1 year when it doesn't, but I'm not personally, I've got nothing invested in that. I'd be very surprised if it does finally happen this year, but who knows? As I say, I've got nothing invested in it, so it doesn't particularly bother me one way or the other. It's very amusing. Some time ago, we were living with someone who was Spanish. A member of my community was Spanish, well, half Spanish anyway. Somebody else who's got a Portuguese background, and the majority of the community. We met, and I think we also had a Frenchman, and there was the majority of the community, of course, were supporting the England football team, but not the others. It created a certain amount of tension sometimes, not seriously, but it was quite amusing to watch. So this is an example of sort of emotionally not facing the reality that probably England's chances of winning the World Cup this time around are not hugely better than they have been in the past. But the hype builds up and hopes get built up, and hope, as described by the great English poet Shelley, by the way, was one of what he called the twin torturers, hope and despair. They're very closely connected. Beware of hope. I mean, I'm not saying that we should live without hope. I certainly don't mean that, but investing expectations and building your hopes up, especially over the England football team, because it will end in tears, almost certainly. So there you go. So that's an example of what I'm talking about, this emotional, stubborn sort of unwillingness to face reality. I mean, it's a frivolous example, but on a more serious level, some years, well, in fact, more recently, I should say, I've been writing about the time when my father died. And because I'm writing my autobiography, it's a project I've been engaged with for a few years now. And the last week or two, I've been writing about that period of my life when my father died. And what happened was that my father was obviously became very ill. He had to go to hospital. It seemed to begin with that he's doing fine. I'd come up from London to spend time with my mother and him. My family lived in Middlesbrough, where I come from, and in the northeast of England. Anyway, about a week later, after I'd come back to London, my mother phoned me one night and saying, "Look, your father's life is hanging in the balance. Can you come?" So of course I went back up to Middlesbrough, and when I saw my father the following day in the hospital, I knew at once that he was dying. I could see. It was just so, I don't know how I knew that, I just knew. But my mother, who really ought to have known better but could not bear to face the truth, kept her hopes up. And day by day I'd have to do my best to reassure her against my own better judgment that, probably he'll pull through eventually. But it became increasingly obvious throughout that period that wasn't going to happen. But my mother, when she was younger, she was a nurse and she'd seen many people die, so she must have, on one level, known what was going on. But she would not face it. And that's so typical of how we behave. Very often, the reality of things is something we don't want to take in. But that doesn't really help us. It certainly doesn't help us to lead, to lead a good life. If we're constantly trying to push the reality of whatever circumstance we find ourselves in away, we'll only make ourselves, we'll increase the amount of pain that we experience. As many of you know, I've got a cancer, and when I was first diagnosed with cancer, I knew at once I had to face it. And more than that, I knew that the best way through to deal with this was to remain as emotionally positive as I possibly could. And that wasn't that difficult. Admittedly, I've been practicing the Metabodhana and what have you for 40 years, which I'm sure did help, but I knew that I had to face that. And that's really, that was actually a very, very positive experience. I saw other people who I met in the hospital when I was going through chemotherapy or radiotherapy, who were just could not face the reality of what was happening to them. If they did, they felt very bitter about it, they felt angry about it. They would ask themselves, well, why me? It's no use asking questions like that. It doesn't really serve us very well. But if you can face up to these things, it makes them much, much more bearable. So this is what we try to do within a Buddhist context. We try to resist that temptation to push the reality away. Try to let it in. And this is how we develop wisdom. Learn to see things how they are in reality. But of course, it's not something you can just do because you think it's a good idea. You need to prepare for that. And part of one of the key components in preparing for this, learning to see reality and deal with it in a more positive and even, I would say, in a happier sort of way, is to develop positive emotion. Because sometimes the realities we have to face can, on the face of it, seem quite depressing. But every sort of hardship or every adversity that we experience in life is actually an opportunity to face it and deal with it in with equanimity, hopefully. But that, of course, takes a long time. But the first thing is trying to develop positive emotion and awareness, of course. Awareness of reality, awareness of the immediate reality that you're facing is very, very important. But we also need to develop positive emotion. We need the positive emotion because if you face reality, or you try to face reality without that preparation, it could have a very disturbing impact on you. T.S. Eliot said, humankind cannot bear very much reality. It's not something that we really readily wish to face up to. But if you can, it leads to a much more happy and fulfilling life. I mentioned death just a few moments ago in relation to my father. But the great American poet, Walt Whitman, on one occasion said, I know I shall love life, I beg your pardon, I know I shall love death because I have loved life. That might sound paradoxical, but I can understand what he's getting at. If you can face the more difficult aspects of life, of reality, the reality that we're all in, the existential plight we're all actually in, then you will lead a much happier and more useful life. The key thing, of course, the key sort of fact of life which we most wish to resist facing up to is that of death. It frightens us. We don't want to think about it. We want to put it out of our minds. It's the last thing we ever really want to consider. But ultimately, you need to be in a position to be able to face that. So maybe that'll do for the moment. I just wanted to sort of give you the bigger picture, if you like, of why we come here to meditate, is to help us face the realities of life, our immediate realities and the great existential issues, especially that of death. I hope that's not sent anyone into a spiral of depression. Anyway, let's pause there and see if you have any questions so far.
What would you say the difference is between emotional positivity because you gave the example of football as like hoping that England wins as delusion, and then emotional positivity, like when you found out you had cancer.
Yeah.
But what's the key difference between emotional positivity and delusion? Like, oh, it's going to be fine.
Well, I would say probably the key thing is a willingness to be open to new experience. One of the problems with what we call the reactive mind is because it's habitual, it likes to stick with what is familiar. And if what is familiar shifts or changes, we feel insecure. But actually, there's no reason to react in that sort of way. I try to regard the cancer as an opportunity. I thought, well, it's a new experience. There was no way I could avoid it, so I might as well face up to it. It's bringing that kind of attitude to life which will help you. Does that make sense? Yeah? I think that is the key thing. Just being willing, being open to new experience, not trying to push any kind of new experience away. Of course, not all new experiences are painful. Some of them are quite pleasurable, but it's the painful ones we tend to want to push away. Yeah.
So you mentioned facing up to reality and cultivating positive emotion.
Yeah.
What advice would you give for cultivating that emotion in the face of something that is very difficult?
In the face of something like?
That is very challenging, like the death of your father, for example.
Well, I mean, I just knew that I had to help. The best way I could help my mother was try to stay in an emotionally positive frame of mind. But I knew that because I'd been practicing for so long already. I think it's something you just slowly learn. But you have to see that in itself has its own worth. There's a value of sort of looking these things straight in the face, if you like. And that's what many people, probably the vast majority of people, find very difficult to do and reluctant to do, hence the delusion. It's not going to affect me. I mean, you can see this classically with romantic relationships. You know, people very often go from one to another and never learn from their bad experiences, because everyone does have bad experiences, I imagine, with romantic relationships. Because usually they're based on mutual expectations, but which are just unreal. There was someone commented last week. She asked, she's not here this evening, but someone asked, well, how do you stop becoming attached to the good bits of a relationship? Because the tendency is to want all the good bits. I think she said something like that, which is fair enough. That's what we want, but actually, all of us are imperfect. We all have our faults, our failings, our foibles, and some of them we don't particularly like. And we tend not to see those when we fall in love. We see just the good bits because there's some sort of projection going on. But then when, the loved one starts to behave in a way that we thought, well, you didn't think they were quite like that, we become disappointed. But it's unrealistic to expect us, the sort of romantic relationship is fundamentally flawed. It usually does not deliver the huge promise that it has when you fall in love. Falling in love is so enticing, isn't it? It feels kind of good initially, but then it quite often doesn't work out. Yeah.
I was thinking about sort of positive emotion and hope, and in a sense, like the blind hope that we might have for England winning or finding the perfect relationship can often seem like positivity, right? It's like optimism. But then what you're describing as positive emotion can also seem like a sort of detachment from any outcome. So like, where's what attitude should we have to like?
Positive emotion is not detached in a cold sort of way. I mean, there's always warmth in what I would call positive emotion. I mean, the basic positive emotion is metta. So there's always warmth of feeling. But, ultimately, what Buddhism teaches is to be able to respond equanimously, that is to say, with equanimity, towards pleasure and pain. You don't pursue the pleasure, and you don't try to push away the pain. You experience them for what they are. And, but on a basis of strong positive emotion. Yes.
You talk about facing up to death. I think my immediate question is, the immediate guttural response is, why should I?
Yeah.
Yeah, so, I mean, there's a reason why people push away the thought of death is because they figure there's no point to it. Like, you die, let's just carry on with the business of life.
Yeah.
Once you face up to death, what then? What's the Buddhist vision?
Well, of course, the whole Buddhist tradition assumes what we call, well, strictly speaking, not rebirth, but re-becoming, to use the technically correct term. In other words, at the point of death, what happens is that consciousness is released from the body. It's not confined to the body. It's not identified entirely with the body. Although we have a habit of identifying with our bodies. But there is a consciousness which survives, which ultimately is the basis for what creates a new life. Now, habitual mental states, whether they're positive or negative, and so on, the result, the consequences of our previous actions, that's what shapes our character. And sooner or later, that consciousness remanifests. So it's not a materialistic view of death, that death's the end of absolutely everything. I don't think I've ever believed that, even though I was an atheist when I was younger. That's the broader context. And you can work on your mental states. You can work on your consciousness. Let's say, you can develop that. You can develop more and more positive emotions, greater and greater awareness, and there's no end to where that can lead you. Ultimately, the Buddhist ideal is called enlightenment, and it means ultimately that means realizing what we call transcendental wisdom and universal compassion, which are not two separate things. They're simply two sides of the same coin. Where there's one, there will be the other. So that's the bigger vision. Yeah.
I think just to add to that is, in accepting death, there's more openness around it. Because where default is to just be like, no, I don't want to think about death. I don't want to plan for my death. I don't want to think about people who've died. When we're able to hold it with a bit more metta and compassion and awareness and not push it away, there's so much to be had there. There's even just like when a family's grieving, if we're all just pushing it away, we're all suffering in silence. But when we're all owning, oh my God, this hurts and it's sad and scary, there's openness and connection that comes from that as well. So I think if we just always push away death, there's a lot we miss. It's easier said than done, for sure. Yeah. But I think that, for me, that is the aim. And then the extra Buddhist stuff as well.
Well, I think if you can face up to death, especially with the death of those who are near and dear to you, grieving, that the process of grief is attenuated. It doesn't mean that you don't experience it fully. You certainly do. I did when my father died and when he was dying. But somehow it just doesn't drag on. I think if you're unwilling to accept, death before it happens, you're also more likely to accept it in a certain sense when it actually has happened, and that causes you further and further grief. Yes?
Have you ever seen anything in your own personal meditation practice which has kind of confirmed or kind of increased your faith in Buddhist rebirth? Has anything ever happened, or it's kind of
well, not directly, but I certainly have had experiences where, I've experienced consciousness separate from the body. And that's not that uncommon. It doesn't happen that very often, but it's certainly happened enough times in the course of my life to see that there is something beyond this body. It's not just, everything comes to a grinding halt with the body. I just can't, it just seems, I can't quite conceive of that. I can see why people would believe in that way if they've got a thoroughly materialistic outlook on life. But once when I was in a long solitary retreat, I was experiencing a lot of fear. I was about a third of the way through a 9-month solitary retreat, and I was dogged by this fear, this anxiety for several weeks, and then it came to a climax, and I knew I just had to face the fear and let it in and experience it. And it really hit me. It really hit me quite hard, and it led to me having physical convulsions. I vomited as part of that, but I had a sudden realization. What it felt like was this. I remember sort of thinking this. My body seems to have a will of its own, hence all this physical reaction, the convulsions and what have you. And then the following thought was, my mind seems to have a will of its own. So what did that leave? It didn't sort of strike me immediately, but it was sort of afterwards I'm thinking, there is definitely something else. But there's been other occasions when I felt I've just been in a completely different world. I've recounted this story a number of times. I'm not going to go into it now because we're running out of time. I need to do some more meditation. But those sort of experiences, which are not uncommon for people who meditate, certainly help. But I'd like to come back briefly to your question, why should I think about death? Well, you never know when you're going to die, for a start. I was quite shocked when I was fairly young when the sister of my girlfriend at the time died. She was 22. She died of a brain hemorrhage, I believe. So it can come at any time. But death is part of life. And I think, in Walt Whitman's sort of phrase, if you embrace death, you're embracing life, because that is part of life. Everything that lives ultimately dies. It's just a fact. It's not necessarily a gloomy or depressing fact, although no doubt some people who lack the necessary emotional positivity could become depressed by reflecting on death. But I think as an adult it's foolish not to think about death. On that note, I'll leave you. That's a little koan for you, Suhaib. I think we need to do some more meditation. Just make sure you're all in a positive mental state before you leave this room. So we'll do it in abbreviated metta bhavana. First, second, and final stages. And then hopefully you'll go blissfully into the night. So closing your eyes. I'll remind you of each stage as we get to it. extending metta towards yourself. the good friend. Extending metta outwards in wider and wider circles. So that's all for this evening. Apart from the usual requests, first of all, if you could help us put all the mats and cushions back into the sides of the room, that would be great. And finally, this is the end of the, this week is the final week in the 21-day challenge, which finishes on Saturday. And we have been asking people for dana, for if you could give something towards the running of the centre. In fact, we've been asking people if they could consider for the whole of the challenge to give £100. You're not obliged to do that. As ever, these classes are completely free. But if you could give at least something, or even better, if you could give £100 to cover the whole of the challenge, that would be great. We do have a lot of projects that we need to keep going. It costs a lot of money to run this place. So if you can contribute to that, that would be very much appreciated, however much you give. Okay, apart from that, I wish you all a pleasant journey back home.
Thank you.
Thank you.